Hello there, boys and girls. My name's Jo, and I've come to read you a story. Today's storybook is one of my all-time favourites, and it's a Mr. Men book. And this Mr. Man is Mr. Greedy. Oh, shall we see what he gets up to? There he is, look, with a big cake. He's left the slice on the plate and he's taken all of the cake. How greedy! Mr. Greedy liked to eat. In fact, Mr. Greedy loved to eat. And the more he ate, the fatter he became. And the trouble was, the fatter he became, the more hungry he became. And the more hungry he became, the more he ate. And the more he ate, the fatter he became. And so it went on. It sounds like he's in a pickle, doesn't it? There's his house, look. Mr. Greedy lived in a house that looked rather like himself. It was a roly-poly sort of a house. One morning, Mr. Greedy awoke rather earlier than usual. He'd been dreaming about food as usual, and that had made him wake up feeling hungry as usual. So Mr. Greedy got up, went downstairs and ate the most enormous breakfast. There he is in bed, look. With that big smile on his face, he looks like he's dreaming about food, doesn't he? Oh, and there's his boiled eggs, look. Oh, I love a boiled egg, do you? Do you want to hear what he ate for breakfast? This is what Mr. Greedy had for his breakfast. Toast, 2 slices. Cornflakes, 1 packet. Milk, 1 bottle. Sugar, 1 bowlful. Toast again, 3 slices. Eggs, 3 boiled. Toast again, 4 slices. Butter, 1 dish. Marmalade, 1 pot. Oh, I should think he is holding his tummy. I should think he's very, very full after that, shouldn't you? When he had finished his enormous breakfast, Mr. Greedy sat back in his chair, smiled a very satisfied smile, and thought, "That was a delicious breakfast," he thought to himself. "Now I wonder what would be nice to have for lunch. Oh my goodness." He decided in order to work up an appetite for lunch, he would go on a long walk. There he is, look, having a walk. That morning, Mr. Greedy walked and walked and walked. Then he discovered a cave. "That's funny," he thought. "I don't remember seeing that there before." Oh, look at the big stairs. Oh, they're bigger than Mr. Greedy, aren't they? Shall we find out where they go? Mr. Greedy, being a curious sort of a fellow, decided to explore. He entered the dark cave. Inside, he discovered some giant steps leading upwards. Mr. Greedy, being a curious sort of a fellow, decided to climb them. They were very steep and very difficult to climb, but with much huffing and puffing, Mr. Greedy climbed up and up. Oh, look at the big door at the top of the big stairs. I wonder who lives there. At the top of the steps, Mr. Greedy came to a door. It was without doubt the biggest door Mr. Greedy had ever seen, and it wasn't quite shut. Mr. Greedy, being a curious sort of a fellow, decided to see what was on the other side of the door. So Mr. Greedy squeezed himself through the crack in the door, and there before him was an amazing sight. The biggest room in the world. Look at the size of that table and chair. I think it is a big room, isn't it? The floor was as big as a field. The table in the middle of the floor was as big as a house, and the chairs around it were as high as trees. Mr. Greedy felt very small. Then he sniffed. Coming from somewhere up on top of that gigantic table was the most delicious foody smell Mr. Greedy had ever smelt. Oh, and look, there's the pepper and salt on the table. Even they're bigger than Mr. Greedy, aren't they? Mr. Greedy sniffed again. Then he decided that he must get up onto that table. So he began to climb up the leg of an enormous chair. It was very difficult and took him a long time, but eventually Mr. Greedy stood on the table. Everything was larger than life. The salt and pepper box were as big as post boxes. There was a bowl of fruit on the table, and Mr. Greedy tried to lift one of the oranges. Goodness me, that's a big orange. And Mr. Greedy, being Mr. Greedy, took a bite out of one of the apples there. Oh, look at that tiny bite. Then he looked around. Over on the other side of the table stood the source of that delicious smell. A huge, enormous, gigantic, colossal plate, and on that plate, huge, enormous, gigantic, colossal sausages the size of pillows, and huge, enormous, gigantic, colossal potatoes the size of beach balls, and huge, enormous, gigantic, colossal peas the size of cabbages. Mr. Greedy hurried across the table towards the plate and, being Mr. Greedy, began to eat. Oh, look at that. Could you eat a dinner that big? Oh, I don't know if I could. Maybe one sausage, but that's about it, I think. Suddenly a shadow fell across the plate, and Mr. Greedy found himself being picked up by a giant hand and looking into the eyes of a real life giant. "And who," thundered the giant, "are you?" Mr. Greedy was so frightened that he could only manage to squeak his name. "Mr. Greedy," he squeaked. The giant laughed a laugh as loud as thunder. "Greedy by name and greedy by nature," he bellowed. "Well, I think, Mr. Greedy, that you need to be taught a lesson." And what a lesson it was! The giant made Mr. Greedy eat up everything on that huge, enormous, gigantic, colossal plate. When he had finished, Mr. Greedy felt very ill indeed, as if he would burst at any minute. "Now," said the giant, in a slightly quieter voice, "do you promise never to be greedy again?" "Oh, yes," moaned Mr. Greedy, "I promise." "Very well," said the giant, "then I'll let you go." Mr. Greedy climbed down from the table and went out through the door feeling very fat and extremely miserable. And do you know, from that day to this, Mr. Greedy has kept his promise. And do you know something else as well? Mr. Greedy doesn't look like he used to anymore. He now looks like this, which I think suits him a lot better, don't you? He's slim, isn't he? So if you know anybody who's as greedy as Mr. Greedy used to be, you know what to tell them, don't you? Beware of giants. Oh, that was brilliant. I really enjoyed that, did you? I really did. I definitely couldn't have eaten all that dinner, definitely. Maybe one potato or a couple of peas. I don't know about you. But anyway, that's enough for tonight's story. I'll be back again soon with another one. So keep your eyes and ears peeled for that, won't you? Now it's time to get snuggly in your pyjamas and nighties and get nice and cozy and ready for bed. Have a lovely night's sleep, a big rest, and you'll be all refreshed and ready for tomorrow. Good night, boys and girls. Bye-bye for now.